So, hello everyone. Welcome to round four of IVED 2025. I'm Maida. I'll be your chair. I'm also from UGM. Kaylisha, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, my name is Kalisha. I'm from Ubaya. My pronouns is she, her. Good luck, everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you. Today we'll be debating the motion that we prefer using teaching ability over research as the main performance indicator for lecturers. Um, just a few reminders, or probably one. Don't forget to time yourselves since, like, I'll be timing you guys, but just in case there are any connection issues and such. But yeah, I think that's it. So we can go on right ahead. First, affirmative, time and place are yours. Here, here.
Hi. Am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Okay. Wait. Let me set my timer first. Do I have to on my camera or I don't know. Oh yeah, assuming no aja deh. I will start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Imagine you are studying asas-asas hukum pidana in UNDIP and you see your teacher, Dr. Umi Rozah, always sit out because they have to attend their research outside the campus, and you go to the exam without knowing anything and expected by your family and your Umi Rozah, for example, to have straight A in class. Affirmative will win this debate by proving two things. That is the scenario that have to be proven and have to be, in the opposition side of the house. But affirmative will win this debate by proving two things. First, why performance indicator that exists in the status quo right now that emphasizes research over teaching ability is flawed and problematic. But secondly, then, why performance indicator using teaching ability is more preferable in the status quo, and the access of education as well. Few setup to set up the debate. First, we think this is a preferred motion. Means this is a comparative motion, judges. So the metric of this debate is not just harm and benefit per se, but also the weighing of comparative benefit and harms that both systems give to status quo, which the status quo is researched, by the way. But secondly, then, so I think this debate is definitely played on like university level, not teacher per se, or like not SMA or SIPA per se, because two simple reasons. First, this is what exists in status quo, like you have to reach BNPT indicator, for example, in university. But secondly, that usually university lecturer have to be that way to prove their ability with a standard that exists in the status quo matters, by the way. But thirdly, then, how main performance indicator looks like in our world. We think that first, doing based on teaching performance, meaning that teacher will be evaluate based on their performance, not only the cognitive ability, but also like interpersonal ability and whatsoever. But secondly, then, there will be a standardization, meaning that there will be a curriculum that always standardized to it, but thirdly, then, there will always be a evaluative assessment for each lecturer to attend and to perform well. Two argumentation. First, why performance indicator and the status quo is not enough, and secondly, why the comparative is better. First, why performer indicator is not enough. We think the improvement indicator that exists in the status quo right now, shifting the sense of college education, right? Why is this true? First, how the framing of contextualization of college in the status quo really looks like. It's overemphasis in learning ability for lecturer, not teaching ability. What is this true? Because three structural reasons. First, in order to you to actually seeking, be a lecturer in the very first place, you have to attend S2 or S3 in like IPK 3,5, for example. But secondly, then, even if you are already accepted in the very first place, there is still hierarchy within the academic community itself that you will be like, first lecturer first and second lecturer later. But thirdly, then, this method is very long process, judges, because in order you to conducting like S2, for example, you have to go to S3, for example, for always 3 years. But fourthly, then, in order to you to get the research, for example, it's also so long, because in order to you to conducting just one research, for example, you have to at least 6 or to 12 months in order to research to get accepted by BNPT. Not mentioning that you also have to wait for 2 years for that research to take the index scopus, for example. This is bad because it's not in line and mismatched with the purpose of college education. But secondly, then, might be opposition questioning what the purposes of college education looks like in our side of the house. We think the purpose of college education is not just to attend and not to have a degree, but actually have to learn, for example. Because first, Both of the college newbies, for example, have a non-basic education that you don't have like SMP and SMA, for example, that anyone to attend in college. But secondly, that this prepare you for like the competitiveness on working class, for example, because this is a capitalistic world, and the competitiveness for working class is actually bigger in their side of the house. Why this is problematic? I will give impact to these two level of impact judges. First, to the student. Obviously, they are the most vulnerable actor that have to cater here. Because first, in a very technical level, we think it is bad because you have to know, judges, that every student are come from different background, different learning ability, different economic condition. That means that their cognitive ability is not always equal. That will not equal at the same level, and they have to be taught in a very different way, for example. But secondly, then the student will most likely go to your class, just see your lecturer sit up, for example. This is principally incorrect because the student already paid for this tuition fee, for example, and you don't give them the most performance ability that you have. But thirdly, then, even if in the very basic case scenario, the opposition might argue that this lecturer is very good, this will still be bad because this lecturer will focus on themselves because their method of education focuses on what lecturer can get, not what student can get. This is the biggest delta in this debate. Why this is bad? Going by us to get a higher ranking and get promoted and get internalized and get validated. Those kind of lecturer have to attend more research or promotion, for example, doctorate degree. The focus in on themselves and not them students. This is why the likelihood of them to opt out from class because this is the only way for make money, for example, because you don't want to get paid $30,000, for example, just what one lecture, for example. But for them, this result to more and more students doesn't have the ability that they need because the lecture is gone and you have to seek the ability from yourself. But this is bad because what I said earlier, this is very important. Every people have the different cognitive ability. Means that if you opt out from this responsibility as lecturer, you make those children embarrassed. For the lecturer, but second impact that for the lecturer and the lecturer itself. This premise is very simple. We think it's make an equal standard for the lecturer that has the most economic advantage. Because first, in order to you to get promotion, for example, you have to go to S2 in very specific area and specific subject in your curriculum. In order for you to get Scopus, you also have to pay like 2 juta rupiah in order for your associate name to get published and get translated to the journal. This means that first, this practically give harm to the study school, both for teacher and both student, and the degree of harm is so severe that the student don't have the ability to think. But secondly, that it's probably immoral because you make education is a private good that just elites that can pay for. Why the comparative will be better in our side of the house? A quick argument, but about weighing why the teaching ability will be better because this is a comparative motion. First, we think that teaching ability will be better in our side of the house because we emphasize the right direction that student really needs. Because the characterization of teaching ability is first, yes, you have to be at least a moderate to high level of knowledge to your field, but secondly, that you also have to make cognitive ability and interpersonal ability. Why this is so important? Because how people internalize education and internalize the knowledge is an interpersonal skill. You have to teach them, and you have to actually internalize them. It's very different from person to person. So it is important for every lecturer to attend this kind of meetings. Is this more more accessible in such school? I would say yes, because this teaching ability is actually predates and actually can be attended by like outside of student, outside of school, not just by S2, for example. And it is comparatively cheaper because you don't have to be like S2 to public relation to get those kind of abilities. You just have to do the debate, for example, not accessible, not just go to IVED, for example, like you can do it to your student, for example. But tell them this will be more sustainable in the long run because judges, education is a complex and a sustainable solution, and it's a very sustainable process. If you cut this education in a most not unfortunate way, this will be harm for the education in the long run. This will be completed by Ilham and Albert. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. First affirmative for that fine speech. Next, I call upon first negative. Here.
Right. Am I audible and visible?
Yep, you're audible and visible.
Awesome. Before I start, pronounce Chem, very small clarification that none of this is actually my personal opinion, strictly for the purposes of this debate. Especially coming from a former teaching assistant, I don't want to get in my lecturer's bad graces. Yeah, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 points to contextualize and like set up negatives case, right? First and foremost, what is our stance? Very, very simple. We want research as the main performance indicator, and what that entails is the second point of setup, which is how we measure it. I don't necessarily think affirmative has done a very good job in really explaining just how you're able to measure like research or teaching ability. And I think this becomes really, really important as not just the prerequisite of affirmative's case, but just what is needed in order to run this debate. On negative, we measure research via quality and quantity of research that is already outputted, whether or not you get it published to accredited journals, whether or not your journal articles or your researches are accredited with SINTA. Like we already have many different metrics of indicating just how good the quantity and the quality of your research is. And I think that sort of metric can still stay. What I also think is pretty charitable in terms of looking at teaching ability as like how you measure it is not just via like academic evaluations, because obviously that is a convenient stance to take, but we also think just the performance of students overall within standardized exams, the way that students are able to perform within their classes as well, graduation rates in the sense of like how many students actually pass the class of said lecturer in comparison to other lecturers in the same class. I think all of these metrics can sort of be interchangeable and intertwined with one another, and I think this is a very charitable example and contextualization to use on affirmative as well. So I hope this clears up a lot of the confusion that has happened in the debate so far. The third and final point of setup is that this debate also cannot change the fact that lecturers still have a responsibility to do both teaching and research. On affirmative, lecturers still have a responsibility to do research simply because Tridharma Perguruan Tinggi still exists, and that is literally the job of lecturers. Just like how on negative, lecturers still also have a responsibility to attend classes and deliver these lectures, right? So I completely agree that some lecturers are lazy and don't deserve to become lecturers, but if they stop attending their lectures for the sole purpose of attending research symposiums like Adin's lecture, I also think that that is an indicator of them not doing their job that warrants some form of like evaluation or also like a performance indicator to show that they're not necessarily doing their job right. So take note of what is and is not mutually exclusive in this debate. And I also do think that this is the way to be charitable for both sides. I think moving forward, rebuttals can be integrated within the rest of the arguments. I'm going to prove two things here. Number one, what is the goal of lectures in university and how that is inherently separate from teachers in school. But secondly, just the objectivity in determining performance indicators. So let's first talk about how lecturers are separate from teachers, because Adin does try to contextualize just the separation of school versus university. But I think I have a huge problem with the way that affirmative tries to set it up, in the sense that don't necessarily portray just the nuance of what you do differently in university. And I'm going to prove 3 structural reasons why that matters. Number one, university has a much stricter pursuit of knowledge. This is the reason why the final selection process to determine whether you graduate or not is a thesis, i.e. skripsi, instead of a final exam like in schools, because the purpose of university is to ensure that you are going to be credible experts in your field because you already have a degree to show for it. Secondly, the demand for students to be self-sufficient. This is also the reason why you have to do a lot of your own reading and understanding of the source material via books and all of that, instead of just having the lectures explain everything to you, like how schools have very teacher-centric learning models, right? But thirdly, in university, lecturers also discern quality of researches. What I mean by this is that they are the ones that read through the numerous assignments where students have to do their own research, even if it is as simple as students having to write argumentative essays. The fact that they still have to cite sources and or still draw conclusions from set amounts of data, even when we're talking about like later on down the semesters where you are faced with more like challenging research assignments where you have to sort of make a research design, make a qualitative research within one semester, etc. You don't do this nearly to the same extent in school as you do in university, because in school the assignments are much more standardized, right? It's just a matter of you doing a set amount amount of math problems, you doing a set amount of like English grammar corrections and whatnot. When you're in university, you don't do like simple problems anymore. What you do is you end up having to have a more there's a higher demand for you to critically think, and therefore the assignment level also increases as a result of that. And that's why you need lecturers to also be smarter within their respective fields to discern that kind of quality. If anything, teaching ability is not fair to put on the lecturers, and I'm going to talk to you about why. Because I completely agree that the parameter of becoming a research or lecturer, like the barrier of entry, is high. You need to be like minimum master's degree, if not a PhD. You need to have a solid enough GPA. You need to have like many like sort of credibilities or creds just to ensure that you have the tenure to become a lecturer, right? But you're not teaching kids anymore. And I think that this is what separates university versus school, and something that affirmative does not necessarily take into account. The demand for lecturers to personally supervise so many students are very, very different, because just on the amount of students and classes increase, you spend way less time with a way higher amount of people, and you're in contact way less with these students, right? So when the metric is there for teaching performance, you have what you have in schools, which is teachers overcompensating, focusing more on making the students happy and being generous with the scores, because in all of the metrics, that is what your performance indicates, right? If most of your students fail your class, that is an indication that maybe you're not a good lecturer when you don't take into account the difficulty of that class, etc. And even if you do still take into those things into account when factoring the performance indicator, it still is very, very different, because exactly as Adin says, so many students are individually different. Therefore, it is not fair to put that burden upon the lecturers. You in fact have a lesser guarantee of ensuring that the lecturers do their job properly and ensure that the students are getting the proper knowledge in their respective fields as they should, right? But secondly, let's talk about the objectivity of the performance indicators. Slightly more principled extension, but there is an impact at the end of this. The purpose of performance indicators is inherently to discern good versus bad lecturers, those who are actual experts in their field, because exactly as Adin says, you need S2 or S3 that are credible enough to give knowledge to others who wish to get a degree and credibility in that same field. Because note, when you give credibility to someone by the virtue of them having an undergraduate degree or S1, what happens is that you are considered a more expert in that field, right? So teaching ability is inherently subjective, regardless of the metric that you use. This exists because even in school, you cannot generalize students. But the difference is, of course, that because graduating in school is the bare minimum, teachers and students equally get that demand, right? But in university, passing classes is not the absolute bare minimum requirement. It is the opposite. Because if you don't give good enough research, if you don't do well enough in your assignments, then you don't pass the class. The passing the class is a privilege, not a bare minimum, right? So research is therefore a much better comparative because it is way dependent on less factors. I could have a kind-hearted and very chill lecturer, and they want to get good evaluation points, and they will get good evaluation points because on all of the metrics they succeed. But if you want promotions and tenure, the distinction between which lecturers actually are considered experts in their field, this is why research is actually the metric. Because when you do research, you are forced to go into that field. You are forced to discern different theories and different opinions in that field, and therefore you are considered an expert when you are constantly renewing the breadth of knowledge that you have to pursue in that field, which means that it is inherently more objective because you are considered an expert in that field, and because your job is to teach others, and because your job is to actually give your expertise and share that to your students. So because of that, it is way more objective in comparison to just teaching and depending all of that onto the students. We win upon that likelihood, and therefore very, very proud to negate.
Great, thank you so much, first negative, for that fine speech. Next, I call upon the second affirmative. Here, here.
Cek, audible nggak, Kak?
Audible.
Ya, wait ya, mau saya tembak dulu. Bentar. Yap. Gender pronouns, he or him. I think my speech can 3 to 1. I think it was very fine remark come from Vinay, but at the end of the day, I think he played very utopic scenario when he can say, "Oh, it's something that objectively can be measured because the quality and the quantity are something that are very rigid at the very beginning." With we see those conditions are not likely to be what Vinay said because how the measurement are mostly on the quantity of research. This is why in every single semester, every single lecturer are forced to submit at least 3 journal or 4 journal, for example. But the problem then become is every single researcher or every single lecturer all have limited amount of time, limited amount of money and quality, for example. This is why mostly the quality of the journal are submitted bad at the end of the day because the continue go in field is something that are very exhausted, for example, and way to increase the objectivity are something less likely. But what is the implication of this kind of condition? Are mostly my professor, Prof. Indah, are always measure and force every single their student, for example, to conducting research that we say is very low quality because we are just undergraduate student and they submit all these things to be a journal, for example, and we say those conditions are not that good at the end of the day. This is why Indonesian journal go and compose quarter 1 are something that are less to be likely at the end of the day. We say those kind of every single thing that are proposed by Vinay are less of the likelihood. Mine the responses will be integrated on my speech. What I'm going to talk to you, two things. I will prove to you why then, at the end of the day, the teaching ability as the key performance indicator is able to fulfill the purpose of the main education and varsity level. And second of all, I will prove to you the comparative why then it could be better inside of government bands. Let's jump to the first one. Why teaching as ability as key performance is way better to fulfill? Several contexts. I think it's very clear and it big concession. The purpose of education is varsity level, talking about the transfer of knowledge. We're talking about either practical and theories, either empowerment in order for them to preparation for the work life, giving their capacity to survive. For example, if you're majoring in accounting, you have this enough skill set in order to survive. But the problem then become like Vinay said, oh, as a lecturer, it's very hard for you to maintain all the class, for example, because there is a lot of person, there is a lot of people that are very different at the very beginning with. This, we say the problem, why then the time when you are uh, imposing more burden for them to conducting research and give more standardized, for example, you need to submit 3 or 4 in the journal, for example, at the end of the day, it will less likely for them to go to the class, for example. This is why we say this condition is no longer beneficial, and this is why we say that teaching ability is the way that's more beneficial. But what's the problem in the current system? I think the KPI as the milestone product as much as possible means that it have more highlight for you in order for you to have more token, for example, to be absorbed. You need to do some sort of research for the more, for example. But at the end of there is no any requirement for you to have a good quality because we're talking amount of the quantity, for example. We say this condition is very bad system that likely. But why it's bad? Two reasons. It releasing a bad process of education. I think the main purpose is on how you can prepare as much as student, for example, to be the next better generation. But the time when you are never go to class, for example, you are never go and say what you need to do and what preparation do you need to have a skill set, for example. I think it's very hard for you, regardless you have a privilege of quality of your brain, for example. The time when you never say and meet with your professor, I think it's no longer beneficial. But second, it will lead into unstandardized system because the highlight of every single Kemendikbud, for example, they're focusing to be more talking about the researcher rather contextual how the system of education are way better. We say make sure the teaching ability as the key performance is the prerequisite for more incentive to repair the system of education. We say is something that very important. But why did those two harm are quite significant? Two reasons. It will lead into unfairness treatment that goes toward all the students. We say the access of varsity level education is not something that cheap. It is something that are easy to be accessed by all those people. But the problem is the time when you didn't get sufficient feedback and facilities, for example, because your lecturer never go to the class, for example, I think something that are very evil at the end of the day. You spend too much money and you don't get anything that you want to have at the very beginning with. We say this treatment in something that talking as varsity level is something that cannot be tolerated anymore. But second, I think the delta of harm will increasing. We're talking about low quality of education. I think this is the prerequisite for generalized for intergeneration for better preparation in the future, right? But the time when you don't have enough the capacity of education, you don't have enough capacity of skill set, I think it will less probability for you to survive, and I think it's giving better generation problem in the future. But what is the comparative anyway? I think the comparative how the world look like inside of government bands. I think we will just prioritize teaching as the main performance indicator, but how it operate into three things. A, there will be type metric. We'll always assess and evaluate the teaching strategy, the teaching capacity on how they are able to teach every single person in the class, for example. What will involve? It will involve a lot of things, talking about the method of teaching, how much a lecturer should go in class, for example, how much stentor can access, for example, or how much tutorial there to make sure every single student are able to have enough capacity. I think when we are talking about how tons of people within the class, we can maximize the tutor and tutorial, and it could be and it could be under the superior of the lecturer at the end of the day, right? How deeper the understanding that have by every single student, for example, metric and standardized for the exam, for example. I think all the process and evaluate by the independent embodiment is something that very important. So if the concern given by Vina is talking the objectivity, I think the objectivity is still there for those kind of condition, and we can operate all the thing as the is the main metric. If there is still person who fail, at least all the lecturer already give at best treatment. We say is something that already beneficial as a feedback for every single expensive money that are spent by all these people. But why is good? Two reasons. A, it will give some degree and quality of education in order to give more proliferation of capacity that are access. This is important because it gives you enough capacity to survive in the future, for example. Better likelihood for you to survive in work life, for example. We say this is something that never being talked by Vinay, whether those research will be able to give those massive benefit. We say there is no any likelihood given. But top of all, I will bite the bullet that opposition might say that, oh, there will be lower amount of research because this is still within the three dharma perguruan tinggi, for example. But we say those conditions are never being likely because there is always another embodiment of research, specifically in every single country, for example. In Indonesia, we know as BRIN, as lecturer can, good teaching and work in the BRIN, for example, or even the one who was, dedicatedly work in BRIN and give more research, for example. But if it's not enough, I think the harm that are on Vinay said talking about the low quality of research really massive in both sides of this house, because at the end of the day, the system that are access give more pressure to produce more rather than the quality more, means that the low quality will be likely in both sides of this house. I don't think how much quantity is quite good the time when you have you can just submit something that not that have higher quality. But why it's better? I think it's better inside of government team because at least you can give an inherent willingness to every single student. You can attract their curiosity from the student, and this prerequisite for might be more researchers come in the future, for example, the time when you can give them more knowledge, for example. Because if we just follow what opposition did, might be the amount of research can hike at that time, but in the future we're losing all those people who have enough capacity because the process of education at the bad at the end of the day. How I weighing those arguments into two things: a scale of benefit that we can protect more people and get more beneficial regardless the research or not. We say very proud to.
Okay, thank you so much, second affirmative for that fine speech. Next, I call upon second negative. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Okay, wait a bit. I need to set up my timer. Okay, pronouns she, her. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A couple of responses first, then over what affirmative has quite literally tell you over and over again. Firstly, on how then research takes a lot of time from lecturers away from the class. So they think that lecturers main priority should be in the classes, right? This is why they won't want research as the main performance indicator for lecturers because they think that students will be abandoned. I think we've already told you enough, like ever since Vinay's speech, that there is a reason why lecturers chose to be lecturers in the very first place. If they wanted to just be researchers, they can just fully commit to the field and just do research full time. Because that is a thing, right? Having a partnership or work for a research company, since it's already established that these lecturers are smart, is an option, right? Then the question becomes, affirmative needs to be able to engage where these lecturers still do wants to teach, but the metric of their teaching is weighed on the quality of the research they produce then throughout the time in which they are employed by a certain university or like employed to teach certain students, etc. Right? It means that this debate can only run when you acknowledge the fact that, hey, these researchers, part-time lecturers still do want to lecture you, still do want to attend classes, etc. Because if we're only debating on whether or not, oh yeah, these lecturers are gonna leave class, then nothing in this debate runs for negative side, right? But that's exactly why I think we shouldn't take like overly worst case scenarios at the fact that your lectures are going to be that absent to the point where you take nothing away from the class. But I'm going to engage that further in my extension, where even if in the worst case scenario your lecturer are that like abandoning you and like your peers and is that absent from class, how it's still going to benefit students at the end of the day, right? But secondly, they also tell you how lecturers are forced to make journals, so it'll be quantity over quality overall, right? This is something that they don't want. I think the quality of your research is exactly what's being judged when research is the main metric for you to get a promotion, not the quantity. If anything, it's going to be the quality. Anyone can make a journal, like what affirmative literally says. They're forced to do it, right? But you can always tell what journal has a good quality of content and which just does not, and is just being published for the sake of being published, maybe for an assignment, whatever. So no, don't just make a bunch of journals for the hell of it in hopes to get a promotion, since if the metric is literally research, then of course the quality of research itself is also a metric. So you cannot just say that, oh, it's just going to be like 5 journals in the span of one semester, but the quality isn't like determined or whatever. It's literally going to be judged on the quality of research that you make. So even if it takes you like 3 semesters to complete one journal or whatever, the quality then is going to be reflected on how you're judged overall by like the university or like from your peers that also does the same thing as you, right? That's why we think that when the research is literally the metric of judging, quality is going to, of course, form to lecturers that do want to opt into it, right? But I'm going to tell you further that in my extension, other actors will literally benefit from this. I'm going to be talking about mainly the students, but also like more like of a second layer, the university itself. I think we need to understand that student needs to adapt, right? You won't know who your supervisors or your boss is, so you need to be able to adapt to all sorts of people because university inevitably prepares you for work. That's literally the point of university, right? It's not like school that prepares you for university, so that ideally every kid has the same skill set or knowledge. It's literally different. It's a whole different system altogether in our educational system, right? Let's say that affirmatives metric works. However it works, even though Vinay has already elaborated how it cannot work since students are dynamic, etc., and that people's teaching styles and people's learning abilities are different inherently, which makes the metric not reliable and is overly subjective. But let's say it does work in the best scenario. You're gonna get what you got in school, more or less the same acting teachers with the same pool of personality that accommodates most students, right? The lack of personality in lecturers will make it so that university is less challenging for students. But then isn't it good that it's less challenging since now I don't have to slave away to be able to graduate? No, even if it doesn't seem like it during your 7 or 8 semesters in university, you benefit from your university being that challenging and that grueling with dynamic lecturers that some will challenge you to an extent that you want to die, and some will give you breathing room in their like lecture rooms. Why? Because when you work, dynamic personalities are exactly what you're going to encounter. You need to be able to adjust to either really strict, straightforward like supervisors or sweet, loving supervisors that are able to accommodate you. Being able to adapt to a lot of types of personalities, like what you've seen during university, literally from your own lecturers, will be easier for you compared to students that gets the same either sweet, loving lecturers because they know that teaching ability quote is the metric of when they're getting evaluated. So it's good that they're good to their students, and then suddenly gets like really tough for you in like the working scenario, right? In the working scene. Doesn't like really want to hear you out because what's important is your work, like these types of supervisors, right? But also, let's take the worst case scenario. Let's engage with affirmative that they are so engaged with their research to the point where they abandon students, only attending like, let's say, 3 out of the 14 lectures they were supposed to teach. We say it's totally fine, since students have to be able to graduate that class anyways. It will teach them how to survive with an absent lecture. Sure, this is something that we do not want on negative, because this is quite literally the worst case scenario, and we don't see how this happens because they're a lecturer for a purpose and they're a lecturer for a reason, right? Something that I'm sure a lot of us has to go through, like with these absent lecturers. It'll make students more self-sufficient and rely on themselves to learn, since I'm sure that even when they're absent, they're still going to give you like assignments, actual assignments to fill in your grade requirements, etc. Because you know your SKS is not only made up of UTS and UAS, right? But also like a bunch of assignments in between, a lot of like minor mandatory readings in between that makes up your SKS. So even in the worst case scenario, sure, it's really frustrating when you go through it. Believe me, no one wants to. But once you do part ways with that class with most likely a good grade because they're absent, how are they gonna grade you fully or accommodatingly, like objectively, right? They're not there. You're going to be even more satisfied with yourself because even through hell you survived, but also in the future the struggle you went through will benefit you in so much more ways. But I think that's something that you need to understand, panels. These lectures have like certain metrics also to fulfill within their classes, so it's impossible for them to completely skip their classes, completely not grading students because how absent they are, because the faculty will require you to get certain grades from your students. How are you going to get that when you're literally not there? So that's, again, just echoing everything that me and Vinny says. This is literally the worst case scenario that affirmative can run from, like the negative side, the negative side, right? And if they're only going to be banking on that, I'm sorry to say that that's not a really good case. A lecturer that updates their knowledge all the time, and a lecturer that understands a lot of types on how to approach researchers via experience, etc., is also very much needed for students. Students with a more updated lecturer, because we have to assume that lecturers are already smart in the get-go, so the metric here is updated because they have to do research that can engage with you. You can have back and forth with you talking like and discussing about certain things in your field that may have changed over the years, etc. Or, you know, if you're curious and want to know deeper about a certain subject in general, it'll be more accommodative with lecturers that actually do update themselves as well in their field of expertise, and not just lecturers that came in university with the same knowledge they left their university in, right? Hell, maybe your own lecturer's paper is going to be the source that you cite in your scriptsy one day. It's also proving that students benefit from a more updated lecturer, since it's also benefiting your own research in the long run, either from having a really experienced docent pembimbing that literally helps you out so much in your research and how to get you the hell out of that university, but also in conversations in class, it'll give you so many more knowledge, right? How then minorly university will benefit from it. When the lecturers you employ that you fund contributes back to the field that they teach, proving that they're probably part of the best pool of lecturers or researchers you can get for this specific field, it will benefit your university and its accreditation in the long run, proving that you have good quality lecturers.
All right, thank you so much, second negative, for that fine speech. Next, I call upon the third affirmative. Here.
Okay, great. Am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Okay, sure. Also apologize beforehand, because I was still sick. No, I'm still sick anyway. You know, if I sniff or maybe cough in the middle of speech, please bear with that, yeah. Also I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. As a student in one of the biggest law school in Indonesia, sure, we got good facility like escalators, lift, and very large basement to park your Honda BRV, and very comfortable classroom anyway. We got 6 air conditioner for one room, and the newest whiteboard is touchscreen. But that's great, you know, and we got that facility, but system-wide is very old and outdated because that was never the focus of current Indonesia education system. I have 2 clarifications that could directly deconstruct your case. I think the first speaker of side opposition seems very desperate for bringing 2 arguments here. Firstly, they attempt to contextualize why is it very difficult for the lecturer to accommodate all students, because you know, every student have different learning style, which is why they attempt to blind your judgment by saying it's normal for students to self-learn because in that process at least they learn something. We don't have to always accommodate that. I think the first thing that we need to point out is that it doesn't. Please do not justify the absence of lecturer by saying that it's within student responsibility to self-learn, because they never intended to self-learn in the first place, but they are doing that because they are forced to do that because there's no one to lean to. There's no one to guide them, for example. I think regardless, you can't really bring that example because I think that's very, very assumptive. I think this is also just the same problem that also applies to them because everything that they say is just symmetrical, right? This is just a general problem in university. I think that is symmetrical, but even worse on their side because they just state why it's going to be hard to accommodate to student in class classroom, but they did not explain why when teacher, the lecturer become a research at the same time will also make that problem better, right? So this is at best just a harm, but it's just a consensus in both sides of the house. It will happen regardless. None of their argument actually explain why being a lecturer that juggle between, researchers and also lecture at the same time will make that even better. Very unfortunate for them actually. Secondly, they said that research is very easy to measure because it has the quantity, for example. I think they are taking this for granted because they also did not explain how the process of that will look like. In order to publish a research, it's a very long process, right? There's process of like you researching and then there's editing and finally publicating, for example. They did not explain how the quality assurance will happen on their side of the house because my second already explained that there's a KPI for you to fulfill. The one who published the most lecturer, for example, gained the most recognition, for example, right? So why this is bad? So this is the deadlock, right? Because this is not about why it's more easy to measure one another, because they also did not explain how to measure the quality of the research, and secondly, the capacity of the lecturer on doing research and while juggling between being a lecturer, for example, simply by one-liner premise that left unexplained because the first speaker of their side was busy explaining his extension. But secondly, I think that the way should be on which one is more applicable for lecturer, because this is also about lecturer capacity. Please don't forget that every lecturer have capacity. The reason as to why they are forced to sacrifice one, like either teaching or even researching, for example, is because they do not have that much time. They have to juggling between both of that, right? So I think that they did not also explain, and this is also directly flipping their benefit anyway, how under the difficult situation where you have to teach a classroom with a lot of students, how you are able to juggle between two conditions, because you also have to take the burden of teaching, but you also have to take the burden to like fulfilling the KPI of research, for example. At best, this is just adding more burden for the lecturer itself. I don't think that they can do that at the same time very perfectly, right? Secondly, about the measurement, right? I think that, if their goal is about making quantifiable research, for example, but that's not possible because we already explained that they're forced to submit at least one journal every single time, for example. But where's the process of like quality assurance, right? If you want example, then I will give you. If you know that Indonesia journals who pass like Q2, Scopus is only 22 out of 20,000 Indo journal, for example. It proves that quality assurance won't exist on their side, even if there's more journal being published on their side, right? I think that regardless, we told you that, researchers from government institutions also exist. We don't understand why we have to push this burden into lecture, which is something that they never justified anyway. But secondly, you also brought the harm, right? I think that when this become a pressure for lecturers, this is a form of like business. You exploit the process of like, publicating journal because you want this, because you are treating lecturer as tenaga kerja gratis, or you want to publicate this because you give recognition for the lecturer who published the most, for example. But I think this is just bad for the overall goals that they want to achieve. So first class, in terms of like which one better the system, I think that here's the problem. There's standard and curriculum, like there's curriculum Merdeka Belajar, and there's teaching metric, like 50% midterm, 25% final exam, and the rest is how active you are in the classroom. The problem with having the main indicator being how lecturer fulfills research KPI, like how many scopus you publish, how many Sinta journals, and etc. They go to classroom like minimal 75%, and then you are doing your job. I think the attempt from opposition to say that there are too much student, teacher can do this, for example, just prove that lecturer will be overburdened on their side of the house, over capacity, for example, they will be doing out of their things and their capacity, right? Meaning the standard is true that it will become very lecturer dependent because lecturer is sort of like put in the pedestal. That should not be the case because lecturer should also be checked and supervised, right? If not, what happens is that the standard will be followed very subjectively and follow accordingly to each lecturer teaching style, which is why sometimes you see that there's a lecturer who gives really charitable scores like straight A, even though you submit a piece of shit, because sometimes they don't even read it or they don't even check it, for example. Or maybe some lecturer gives scores that don't match your effort, even though you spend 2 sleepless nights researching for that paper. And there are a lot to mess up your score like a gamble. Kind of funny because sometimes it works in your favor, sometimes it won't. It made us wonder apakah dosennya yang pelit nilai atau kita yang ngemis, for example. The second reason is about solving the disconnection between student and the lecturer, for example. Because sometimes the lecturer is out of reach and away most of the time because they're doing their research, right? And this is the sense of unapproachable that force students to do their own thing. They're not doing this because I have to do this because I'm independent, but I'm doing this because there's an absence of guiders that exist because they're doing their journals. Because of the nature of promotion, honorary status, for example, make it very hard for a lecturer to be a good lecturer because it has no benefit at all for them to be a good lecturer because the one who get most recognition or the one who get most promotion are the one who publish most scopus, for example. So there's no use instead of being a good teacher, why not being a good researcher, for example. These are what happening right now in the current campus curriculum, right? I think that thirdly, I think that they fail to explain how quality and also like assurance will happen on their side of the house because they kill their kids when they say that student can also do their own research, but there's also thesis, right? I want to first clarify that to complete your thesis, it also requires students to fully understand why they're in that major. They also require to have a really good understanding about theory and knowledge, right? So in the process of students have to self-learn, for example, meaning the quality of their thesis or the quality of their assignment will be very subjective depending on the student itself because the absence of a guider and also the lecturer providing standardized teaching, for example, meaning the knowledge will be very, very subjective because like they are forced to self-learn in the end of the day, which is the quality of thesis sometimes is very, very uncontrollable on their side of the house. We are also able to highlight the problem that it was very hard for students in the learning process because it became unclear in terms of how students want to study or follow the curriculum because the standard is very diverse. They become clueless in terms of how they want to study and put their focus because the standard is very unclear. Because sure, the purpose of college has different priorities like Tri Dharma, etc., for example, but having a decent classroom interaction is the bare minimum. Please do not settle for less for side opposition. On our side, our counterfactual is better because we say that doing research can also be direct to the student, for example, because nurture human resources is also very important as a college to do because there's also regeneration. You want to make sure that you make better human resources for the future, like Indonesia 2045, for example, right? So student needs should also be accommodated, and on our side, you gain more scale of benefit because student needs will be listened and prioritized. This is opposition prerequisite about quality research because you also need more human in the future to become the next researchers, for example. But it will not happen because there's going to be more dumb student on their side of house when the lecturer is not doing their job, for example, right? On our side, you also gain more objective scoring metrics. Instead of having a good score, the lecturer will actually listen to the student itself and give explanation how they give that score to your paper. We are very proud to stand in affirmative.
Okay, great. Thank you, third affirmative, for that fine speech. Next, I call upon third negative. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Okay, wait. Uh, okay. Starting my speech in three. Wait. In 3, 2, 1. I think one thing that's to be covered before I go into my class, right? I think when opposition say that we are saying that we are trying to justify lecture abandoning their responsibility, we are not, right? But we say that if we make teaching ability a prime metric, it means that lecturers will have different teaching styles, right? And benefit the students by giving them adaptability, which what Rene explained to you, right? So we are not justifying lecturer abandoning their responsibility, but instead we will give you a very explainable, a very explainable on how we will actually prevent this, right? So so I will bring you two classes, right? So first is which indicator is the best for lecturer, right? And then second is which indicator can educate the students better. So onto my first class, right? On which indicator is the best for lecturer. I think it's very apparent, right? That on opposition, they want teachers to exactly work themselves to death. They want teachers to exactly be a kind of slave, right? And when they say that the lecturers have capacity, they cannot be that much catering to all students. Like they cannot be that much teaching to every student. I told you, right? That every student have their own capacity, that every student have their own cognitive ability. And it means that lecturers cannot cater to every one of them. And it is exactly then, if they say lecturer have capacity, it means that this lecturer also is not justified to teach all of them. But then other than that, let's engage to their case, right? Firstly, they say that lecturers are more prone to abandoning their responsibility and giving unjustified marks. For example, when you submit bad assignment and they give you good marks or so on and so on. I think firstly, we think that it's widely known that the pay for this lecturer is so much less than any other job if they make this their main livelihood, right? And then B, the demand of the job is so big, you are expected to cater to every student and manage them, right? So what does it mean then? It means that the people who chooses to be a lecturer or the people who chooses to be this in under this kind of demand and pressure are people who either have no other choices. It means that this is literally their livelihood and they can get fired to do it. So it's very unlikely for them to leave their job in the first place, right? And B, to do it as a side job. Okay then, maybe lecturer with this characteristic who do this as a side job will abandon their students. But I think they also have a position to maintain, right? With their students and acquaintance. Because if you are that bad, for example, if you are abandoning your responsibility then, you also show a bad reputation to everyone that knows you, to everyone that see you as a lecturer. What does it mean that integrity as a lecturer is also questioned? Your integrity even as a person is also questioned, right? Because you are abandoning your responsibility. But then lastly, C, people who are passionate enough to do this kind of job and are willing to do it, which is the type of lecturer who is the most unlikely to leave their job, right? Because literally, this is literally what they want. This is literally what they like. And it means that everything that comes from opposition, we have already debunked it. But then second response then, even if there are other characteristics, we think that accountability evaluation will exist on both sides, right? So lecturer can just abandon the responsibility and just do it what they want, right? Because the students can give this accountability report and the lecturer themselves have to give those kind of accountability reports, right? Then if they still abandon their responsibility when this kind of mechanism exists, A, they get fired, B, they get reputation, and C, it will hard for them to pursue any other job. A package deal of unemployment, which is, what does it mean then? It means that it's very unlikely for them to job in the first place. So we think that the first clash on how this will impact the lecturer on their integrity, we have won it, right? Because we have already explained to you that research instead will be good for them because it is something that they literally expert in. This is what literally what they expertise in, and they are doing it right now, right? So that's why we won the first class. But then, other than that, I think the uh, the difficulty for this research, they also say it right where it will make it harder to be a lecturer. I think it's good then. The higher degree of education, then it's important to actually fulfill the needs of teaching university students, right? Which is already adults and already have degree of education, which Vinay has already explained to you. But then other than that, this is also exactly what the students need, and the so-called future generation that they characterize to you, right? And what does it mean that? It means that for these students, that enthusiastic, that curious, it means that it's good for them to get this kind of things, right? So we think that they are not tangible harm. But then, on to my second class then, on how this will impact the students. I think when they say that different students have different, so they need to be taught in different styles. I think firstly, Rene has already explained to you beautifully how this will create adaptability on the students, right? And then secondly, I think you cannot expect every lecturers, hell, even teacher, to cater to every students over and teach them one by one, right? Because it's completely unjustified if their idea of lecturer having to fulfill that is because they are paid. And then third response then, even if they need to cater to students with teaching ability, we think that one of the objective metric for teaching ability is the average mark in their class, right? What does it mean then to the students? I think it means that the students exactly get those kind of unjustified marks that they get from lecturers, right? On how opposition has said. For example, you give out a bad assignment, for example, but you get good marks for it because your teacher need those kind of evaluation from you. Your teacher need those kind of accountability evaluation from you so they can continue their job, right? So we actually flip this idea and prove to you what this will more likely happen to them, right? Because this characterization and this incentive for the teachers just comes, right? And they haven't actually explained it to you. But then I think fourthly then, it's actually good then because it's actually bad then for them because students will be too dependent on the lecturers, which isn't something that you want. in university, right? Because this is literally a university. You are literally teaching adults. You are literally preparing them for the future, right? So what you need for them is to be able to be self. You need to prepare them for the future. You need to tell them that the world isn't gonna spoon feed you everything that you need. You need to learn something by yourself. Teachers are here just as your guidance, right? Lecturers are here as your guidance, right? And lecturers are not your mom, for example, that are going to baby fit you every time in all the time, right? Because that is exactly the simulation of how the real world works, like how the real workplace works, right? You are guided by your supervisors. Hell, even you are abandoned by your supervisors, and you need to figure things on your own, right? Even if you have transfer knowledge then on those kind of things, within that, in the end of the day, you are already an adult. An adult can self-sufficient themselves. Any of the day, that's why we are proud to uh, oppose.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, third negative, for that fine speech. Next, I call upon the negative reply. Here.
Again, cool. I assume it's still audible and visible. Same like disclaimers as before still applies. But yeah, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think this debate is largely contingent upon 3 things. The first is just how you actually measure the indicators, because there's a lot of like tension on both sides on this. We posit to 2 metrics. Number 1 is on just the characterization of the indicators itself. Negative is able to win upon the clarity of model, because in this house prefers or just prefers motion, you really need to do a lot of contextualization to explain what it is you are actually preferring. I think affirmative give really fair and reasonable impacts, but I think miss the main prerequisite of running that comparative, which is just as simple as how are you going to measure it? So when a second affirmative, especially here, gives a lot of that characterization, we already prove how even the exact same and charitable metrics from first negative, it is still better for research to therefore be the metric. So not only do we also win a clarity of model, but this leads to the second tipping point, which is on the likelihood of objectivity. We also already proved why that matters, because in measuring upon the indicators, the objectivity matters because you have to give tenure and respect as well as promotions into the right person. This is not just a matter of salary, but we've already contextualized what it is you get from having good research indicators. That's why first and second negative actually matters, because in my second argument, I already contextualized how performance indicators matter, not just because this ensures that lecturers sit in the classes, but because this discerns good and bad lecturers. So when you need that discernment, the likelihood of the metric and actually doing its purpose is an important contention point of the debate that negative proves, because affirmative's attempt at engagement is stuck upon proving whether or not it is actually objective, but does not therefore continue to explain how it actually gives a good output. So even if affirmative's biggest tipping point, according to third affirmative, is on impacting, then we can also win on that metric. But secondly, what about which metric fulfills the goal of university? We already give you 3 reasons that I already portrayed, just how stark the difference between university and school is. I agree with both Adin and Ilham when they say that university is inherently different. But I also think their metric fails to portray this distinction beyond saying that you need students that are prepared for the field. I think that extra contextualization that negative gives is really, really important to give the portrayal of what it is you do within university. But I also think 2 points if this is the metric that that affirmative wants to use. Number 1, if preparation in the field is the metric, we tell you that having lecturers that are active experts in the field and have a demand to produce quality of researchers that fulfill the quality standards. So this is not just a matter of like having Scopus, because obviously that's international, but this is also fulfilling local standards, how many accredited journals you get your articles published in, etc. We already give you all of that contextualization, and how we also impact this to let the students get a better quality of knowledge in the field. So on the affirmative metric, we win. Secondly, if the metric is on what we prove, which is that in university there's a greater demand to be self-sufficient, we also tell you that lectures skipping lectures is a worst case scenario that is likely to receive reprimanding on our side as well. But B, if you in fact need that degree of self-sufficiency, then you also are able to fulfill it when the quality of research is also able to determine how your assignments are graded, in the sense that you want lecturers that are able to discern how good or bad your essays are, because that quality essay also determines to what extent you're able to get a further job in that field, right? So in terms of fulfilling the goal of university, we also do that. But the last contention point is on students. And I think this is a minor but important point as well, because Negative's most importantly unengaged piece of material is on why lecturers need to continue expanding on the scope of their theories, because they do not stop at just being those who teach. There are also people who are involved in that field and ensure that the knowledge they distribute is up to date, because that's the kind of assignments that the students also submit. So when we prove to you that students don't just stop at following curriculum, but also needs to learn what it takes to survive in that field, even on scale of benefit, we also posit that we make better students outright, because the point of research is not just a bare minimum requirement to fulfill, but in doing that research, you gain insight. So the tipping point here is just that in doing research, both process and output matters. On affirmative at best, only the process impacts the student positively, so we're able to aggregate a better demand on both sides. Therefore, still very proud to negate.
All right, thank you so much. Last but not least, I call upon affirmative reply. Here.
Am I audible or visible?
Yep, you're both audible and visible.
Thank you. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Clarification, I'm so sorry, Umi Rosa, you are so beautiful. Thank you for your service and devotion to University of Diponegoro. We love you. Several evaluations to kick the entire opposition case in this debate. First, I agree that Vinay said that schools and university are two different things, but the entire negative case are inexclusive and have no likelihood at all, because their case just say that every student have different learning ability, and it's hard for lecturer to assess every single student. But why the comparative is have to be researched is still questionable, because they never actually to prove to you judges and us how the research is actually conducted and why this will increasing the performance to student per se. Because judges saying jargons like exactly this what I didn't say don't prove anything. Judges, you cannot step in, their case is still jumpy.
Sorry, Adin. Sorry. My internet cut out. Do you mind redoing your speech, or is it all right? I'm so sorry.
Do I have to ngulangin clarification to Miroza lagi? Yes, I will do it.
Boleh.
Okay.
Sorry. Mati lampu, Gomez.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I will start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Clarification again to Miroza. I'm so sorry. You are so beautiful. Thank you for your service and devotion to University Diponegoro. We love you. Several evaluations to kick the entire debate from this, for the entire negative case from this debate. First, I agree with what Vinay said that school and university are two different things, but the entire negative case are inexclusive and have no likelihood at all, because the entire case just say that every student have different learning ability and this is hard to lecture to assess every single student. But why the comparative that by research is questionable, because they never actually prove to us how the research are actually conducted and why this will increase the performance to student per se. Because judges saying jargon like exactly this is what Adin said don't prove anything. You cannot step into this case. Their case is still jumpy. But secondly, Linson and Luis come to this debate by saying that exactly student is in university have to adapt with their lecture, because you cannot know what your supervisor, and you have to be self-sufficient for the working classes, because really this is not SMP or SMA, but the question becomes why you give different metrics in SMP and SMA. So I think this is the problem with reserve the house. So this logic you have to teach them since SD that the mold is clear. The case don't make sense at all. There's two contention in this debate. First, the purpose of performance indicator. Negative say that the purpose of education have to be best lecture, and this is what performance indicator give the most objective. First, then this case you can by this case by proving first they can prove why there is no standardization on our side, but secondly why this standardization is equal to better lecture performance. First, saying that this lecture index corpus or Sinta or this is in the same field is not equal to better learning ability and teaching ability judges, because first they never actually prove how the so-called qualitative and quantitative assessment Scopus Sinta works, but secondly that they also never prove the link back to the overall student performance per teacher, because this is not exclusively and even better outside of the house, because if you give the mindset of the sole purpose of them is actually teach the student this will give more incentive for them to see the student, for example, what the response to this is very weird because they said that we never proved the standardization. But secondly, that I think this clears is the very minutes of my speech because there will be a standard evaluation outside the house because I think this is a preferred motion, right? Like Fina said. So this is very clear that there will be a standard cognitive and interpersonal ability that you will attend at the very get-go. So I think it's clear if you buy their case, you have to buy our case too. But not only that, let them actually prove the threat of why even if university education is not accessible, it's okay. Because it's exactly the burden in the of the house. Compared to our side of the house, we threat of the yes, might be research ability is not that good, but the transfer of knowledge is there. So how you frame these two contradicting framing? First, the premise of exclusivity. We think all negative is exclusive because they never actually prove why using research ability university is exclusive to determine teacher performance. But secondly, then by the metric of likelihood judges, because they never actually prove why this research indicator equal to all benefit that they will get, i.e. quality lecturer or even preparing student in comparative to us. We prove to you why this will push teacher to be more solid for their teaching. So based on the two metrics we went. But second context is then the betterment for both student and teacher, because I think this is what negative want to dominate debate by saying that this is very worst case scenario. This teacher might leave their student, but it's still valid because first we give you the likelihood why this lecturer will leave this class, because first they have to pursue higher diploma and stuff. Second, the incentive structure for them because money and etc. But thirdly, then the mindset that assert with the teacher in the of the house. But secondly, then, this will be bad because not all students can fit the lecturer. We never say that all lecturers have to see every single student, but the approach is not for lecturer advantage, but the student ability to learn. Secondly, then, this is much worse in their side of the house because when you use teacher approach, not the student approach, this is questionable because all the benefit that they want to say is based on student, but they focus on the teacher. The way is very simple. In this side of negative, because this will be more nuanced and assuming both teams use one size fit all judges. In the very worst case in us and best case in them, we still win this debate because we focus on the student and they focus on the lecturer. The ability is different. The purpose of the education is fulfilled and the benefit is contingent to our case.
Great. Thank you guys so much for the debate. Once again, I apologize for the mati lampu. If please leave this room. Later on, we'll call you when we're ready to give the